Alrighty, so I thought it'd be kind of cool for me to do a little video on how to look for a used PC, what to look for. So basically, I'm just setting this up the same way that you should do it in case you don't know about computers too much and you're just wondering what is good, what it's going to run at 60 frames on most games, blah, blah, blah. This is for someone just starting out into gaming of what is healthy. So this is in Canadian, so real quick, $500 Canadian is 382 American. So you just remember that. That way you guys won't be like, wow, those prices are insane. Canadian is much more worth, it's worth much less than American. So first things first, the baseline of a decent PC is anything above or near a Ryzen 3 1200 and a GTX 1050 Ti graphics card. So anything that's above this or pretty close to it will run most games at 60 frames on high settings. So I'm just going to start looking at just some of these. I looked at this one, and it actually is quite good for the price. So 380 American is what it would be. I don't like that it doesn't really show too many pictures. It has two USBs at the front. The microphone, uh, the disk drive, which is nice. The case is pretty ugly. Looks a little bit beat up, but the case isn't the biggest deal. The inside components really are. So some of this is going to be in French since I am looking at Montreal. The i5 3470 actually pairs pretty close to this. So just real quick, I'm just going to do i5 3470 and then it will compare it. So this is the average benchmark that it scores and then the actual average usage of how much it is actually substantial. Substantiable? Substantial. Made up a word. So just go back to it real quick, just make sure I typed in the right one. Yep, 3,470. So we can see that it is pretty close. The overclocked obviously is much better on this because the Ryzen is overclockable, but this is much that it is more than strong enough to run games at 60 frames with a decent graphics card. So now we're going to look at the difference between a 1060 3 gigabyte and the GTX 1050, and it is much, much stronger. It does run games pretty well. The processor that was on this will not bottleneck this GPU for the most part. It will have a little bit, but it's not too bad. So I would deem this computer as quite decent. It does have a 1000 gigabyte hard drive, so that's 1 terabyte. It does have an SSD with Windows 10. I imagine the Windows 10 is on the SSD, so that is nice. 8 gigabytes of RAM. It doesn't say how many sticks it has because you always want multiple sticks. One stick of 8 is fine, but it's not going to be getting nearly as good FPS as what it possibly could be. The other thing that's missing is the power supply. With an older computer, I would say a 450 is safe. A 380 is kind of cutting it close. I want to stay away from that. 400 would probably be fine. But something newer with newer parts, you want to look for really a 500 or higher. So let's look at a different one. So this one is more money. It's a CyberPower, and I can already tell it's overpriced. Yeah, he doesn't really say what's actually in it. Really cryptic. I don't like ads like this. You want to watch out for these. Um, it doesn't really say what's in it. When it's written like this person obviously doesn't know too much about it. So this kind of thing you want to stay away from. Because if you ask them a question, they're obviously hiding it for whatever reason. The GTX 760 is actually not a terrible graphics card, as you guys can see. Whoops, wrong one. 760. Like by no means is it terrible. It would be fine if it is your first PC, you're just starting out, blah blah blah, but it's still not as good as 1050 Ti, which would be the bare minimum of 2019. Bare minimum. So you want something actually stronger than that. A GTX 670 is probably the lowest I would go, which is almost identical to this. This is the lowest I would go. No lower than this. This will run most games at 40 frames with a half decent CPU. It will run most games and you'll be good. But yeah, I don't really like that. I just don't understand why people do that. I got tricked when I bought my last used computer because the person advertised it as an i5 at 3.2 gigahertz, which I automatically defaulted to the i5, 3470, and in fact it was an i5 750, and it was just kind of upsetting because that is substantially different. Whew, this is actually pretty reasonably priced. GTX 1080. Okay, so that's really, really good. 16 gigabytes of RAM is ideal. Looks like 4. The case is actually a half decent case. And the management is actually quite nice. Don't really like the size of this. But above all, it looks quite decent, especially for the price. And he is honest enough to say it could use a new case, but the case doesn't look bad whatsoever. I do know that this is an older generation and normally sells for about $50 around here new, so it's not exactly ideal. The i7 2700K is actually a really good processor. Like it holds up against some actual decent CPUs of last generation. I am actually curious to see how much far behind is it from the 8400. So this is actually a good comparison, and the average overclock is only 7% higher. You cannot overclock this, but you can overclock this, and it's 4 cores by 8 threads. That is quite nice. Just curious on what is the highest benchmark that someone pushed this up to. Geez, they got it up to a 4.7 turbo. Okay, so this, I would say that this CPU is not strong enough for 1080, I believe is what's in it. Yeah, the GTX 1080, which is substantially good. It's not a Ti, it's just a regular 1080. But yeah, it's killer good. I don't understand why this guy's selling it so cheap. The processor is definitely bottlenecking it, but not to the point where it would be under a 1070 performance. And he does have an actual really good SSD. I might actually considering looking into this. If I can talk this guy down to 800 bucks, I would actually gladly drive the 4-hour drive to get this thing. I might look into that. Look at that. Found something for me. I gotta go. It's eBay. I was gonna say. I don't want to look at any ones that are being sold by a store or any ridiculously priced ones. Like this, I don't even want to look at. I don't trust it. Rather buy like a junky one. So here, let's take a look see at this. This is a very basic computer. See what he actually has written. So it has 16 gigabytes of RAM. That is sweet. The same processor as before, which is actually half decent one. And then where it's going to fall short is this GTX 750 Ti. But if you look at it, just get an idea of what games it advertises. It's not great. It's pretty low. It's probably not even going to be able to run Fortnite very well. Yeah, 47. Would it be playable to play with Fortnite on this PC? Absolutely. Low settings at full HD, you'll probably be able to push about 60 frames out of this. Maybe a little bit higher, maybe 70. But above all, I don't think it's worth it because I am looking at this power supply, and it doesn't look like it's a brand name. It's only shooting the one cord out. I don't really like any CPU getting powered by one of these angled ones. They're usually pretty crap. But if you are in a pickle and you find something similar to this, and it is that cheap, it is definitely worth it. I think for the price it's worth it, but for someone to put all their eggs in that one basket, you got something that you don't want to replace anytime soon. That's not ideal. You could upgrade the GPU depending on how strong that CPU, or uh, depending on how strong that PSU is, the power supply. You could upgrade all the way up to 1066 gigabyte, and it wouldn't bottleneck too much without having to do anything special. See this one here, this is ideal. So let's just look up how much it is. So 700 Canadian to US dollars would be 536 bucks. So looking at it, it does look pretty. This guy obviously took care of it. I can already tell that the cable management is quite good. You can just tell right here that he actually tucked it behind and everything looks to be pretty solid. Has RGB lights. Looks like it has everything you possibly could need. And it has the clear case that looks like he may have made it himself with a piece of plastic and then drilled the holes. Nothing wrong with that. Plastic does hold a little bit more heat than metal. It sticks around. But let's just take a look at it. My French is decent, but not that great. So it has Windows 10 Pro, it has the AMD 3, which is the baseline of what we're using to compare. So the Ryzen 3 1200, which is a great processor. I used it for quite a while on my other build. It holds up even to today. It gets pretty decent gaming experience, and his graphics card is the RX 570, which is actually a great graphics card. Scores right exactly where you want it to go. Gets decent FPS in most games. I do have to say that it does score a little bit higher FPS than what it's advertising here on all high settings. I can safely say that. It gets more closer to 60 to 70 than what it's showing. It has 16 gigabytes of RAM, that's really good. 320 gigabyte digital, and then an SSD. The only thing that looks negative here is the Thermaltake 430 and the fact that its hard drive is incredibly small. Nothing else is raising a very red flag. It's just not ideal to use a 430. I'd rather it be a 500. You probably be fine with the setup, just running it through my head. He has an overclock to a 3.8 because the standard I think is the 3.3. You can just see it here actually. Normally it says it here, but the best boost is a 4.1, which is crazy. I didn't know you could go all the way up that high. Just curious. I'm looking at this best benchmark. He got it up to a 3.85 turbo. So interesting. So this one I would say is definitely worth it. The main thing that I'd be trying to switch out is getting rid of this. This should be fine. The fact that it's a very small hard drive means that it is probably old and could get some stuttering, but not necessarily the biggest red flag. It would definitely do 60 gaming. Now for that price of 700, I go with no. I believe 575 Canadian is the top I would pay for that, just considering you could potentially make this computer with sales for about that price and get actual better name parts. eBay. We'll try one more. Oh, just a tower. Tower. Crappy, crappy, crappy. I'm looking for a very particular kind. 6-core gaming. So I'm guessing it's a Ryzen 5. Okay, this one's actually cool. So let's just take a quick little look-see at the picture. Really weird fan. The GPU is up there. That makes me curious what the hell is going on. Oh, it's not the GPU. What the frick is this? Huh. That's very strange. And he has that covered up for whatever reason. Cable management is absolutely terrible. Yeah, this looks like nonsense. I would steer clear of this one. The only thing I was excited about was going over this i7, because as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, that's an i7, that's great. But the problem with the triple-digit i7s is they aren't they aren't terrible. So let me just get that straight out the bat. They are not terrible GPUs whatsoever, but it isn't necessarily as good as a regular i7. It completely competes with this, absolutely no problem. They are very, very similar. It'd probably be closer to the 1300X, and yep, I am right. Um, is a really decent CPU if you can get it. Uh, it will not bottleneck an RX 580 or 570, 1050 Ti. You probably go up to a GTX 1060 6 GB. That's as high as I would go, and you probably be fine with minimal bottlenecking. But there's the fact of this. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that before. It's really weird. That's bothering me. If someone knows what that is, please tell me, because the CPU is obviously right here. That's the CPU cooler. I've never seen just two random fans slap down. I've never seen a hard drive need its own cooling system either. Because considering this is old, maybe it's outdated, antique hardware that I never used when I was growing up. But I've been dealing with computers for quite some time, and I can safely say I've never seen that. But it was interesting. So, hopefully you guys learned something from this. Oh, yay. This could be fun. Let's see if there's any red flags on this one. So, the i5 2400, which is totally acceptable. i5 2400. Pull it back down to the 1200. It is pretty similar 5549. It is much weaker, but it is still a decent CPU in general playing games like Fortnite. Next is the 1063 gigabyte, which we've already looked at, and we know that it is a very good GPU. It will get a little bit of bottleneck from this, but not terrible. Not terrible whatsoever. You'd only notice it side by side. 8 gigabytes of RAM. Just curious if it's got two sticks. Looks like it has two, so that's good. It is a no name. It's got the motherboards that I don't like, and the power supply is a 380 watt, which is a giant red flag. But he does advertise it is an A plus bronze. You are going to get bottlenecking with this. I know that the 1060 calls for a much stronger power supply than that. I'm pretty sure it calls for 500 or 450. Yes, the manufacturers do make it higher just so you don't blow it, but this is an older power supply, and you can also tell a huge sign is having this old gate at the back. So I would go with a no to this. Even though the price is very reasonable, it would be $270 American. I mean, I would do it if you have the complete intent to rip out that power supply before it causes damage. Everything else seems to be absolutely in order. CPU is half decent and everything. All right, that is going to be it. If you have any questions, honestly, you can send me used computers. So send me a link. I can look at it. It only takes me a couple minutes, and I can tell you if it's good or bad or what to watch out for or what to replace. It's no trouble to me.